In this episode, this is episode 56, by the way, of the Rule Your Pool podcast, I'm going to try to talk about what we can do to prepare for 2022. Specifically, in this one, I want to talk about how we can ease into the summer and what can we do right now while the water's still cold before we open it up for the season. What can we do to make our lives as easy as possible and control what we can control? I'm your host, Eric Knight with Orenda. There's a lot to talk about here, and I'm going to try to keep this episode as concise as possible without getting into too much detail. Episode 56, let's go.
Welcome to Rule Your Pool, the podcast by Orenda that explains and simplifies pool chemistry so that anybody, regardless of experience, can understand it. I'm your host, Eric Knight, bringing clarity to these subjects so that you can bring clarity to your water. If you're ready to rule your pool, then let's go.
Most of the conversations I've had this year have been with customers that are asking us, what's 2022 going to look like? What do we do this year? What do we do if we can't get chlorine and acid? What do we do if we can't get materials or people? There's a labor shortage. There's a chemical shortage, a raw material shortage, and a patience shortage. And that's to be understood, because if you're trying to conduct your own livelihood and you cannot get the materials you need or the people you need, it's very, very stressful. And the way I kind of look at 2020 and 2021 in the pool industry anyway, is our industry is very, very blessed, but also very stressed. We are blessed in the fact that our industry actually grew during the pandemic because people were home more. And that's extremely fortunate that we are considered essential workers and all that. And we are, because if a pool is neglected, it just becomes infested with bugs and mosquitoes and algae and germs and all that stuff. So it is important to keep these bodies of water in people's backyards clean and safe. But we're also stressed in that we've had to work this entire time with very limited supplies. Supply chain shortages are very real, and you're seeing it in every industry. In the pool industry, it's particularly vicious because we're not that big of an industry. We don't have the buying power to really command a change in the supply chain. Some people might. I think of the auto industry. The auto industry has so much more buying power than just about any other industry. I mean, compared to the pool industry, come on. There is no comparison. But look at what happened to them. They can't get microchips. Everyone always just assumed that the automakers could always get it because of this just-in-time ordering. And what really happened is they don't hold a candle to the microchip demand from Silicon Valley and the computer companies. Smartphones, tablets, devices, they buy way more microchips than cars. So suddenly the auto industry realizes we actually don't have buying power in this, and that is the pinch point. It's microchips. Well, in the pool industry, we don't really have the buying power on chlorine anymore. We are not the biggest consumer of chlorine. Elemental chlorine is mostly going to, and I learned this recently, PVC manufacturing. PVC stands for polyvinyl chloride. I didn't know that. I guess I knew it was polyvinyl chloride, but I never thought about it requiring elemental chlorine to produce plastics like that. Well, it does, and it uses a lot more than the pool business. So we are pinched in that there's a finite supply of this stuff. And if you believe all the rumors, then you're probably going to be short on things like cyanuric acid, certain types of algicides, non-chlorine shocks maybe. I don't know what we're going to be short on. I can't predict the future. But let's just assume we're going to be short on everything, because if we assume that and we prepare for that, then we're going to be pleasantly surprised if it doesn't happen. Whereas if we prepare assuming that it's going to be there and it isn't, that's not really a good plan. So I'm going to be very conservative on this, and I'm going to plan for the worst. So the main question that I get is, what do I do now? What can I do to get ready for openings? Now, this is primarily in the Northeast. That's where I've been spending the most time lately, because it's cold and pools are covered and closed right now. We've talked about in previous episodes, one of the biggest issues that people in the Northeast have is crystals or winter dust when they open up, because they didn't winterize in the fall correctly. They didn't put enough calcium in the water to get ready for the winter. They weren't thinking about the LSI as the temperature dropped. Well, now the temperature has dropped. It's cold. These pools are sitting dormant under these covers. What can you do now to make the opening a little bit smoother when it comes, in April or May? So here are a few suggestions. Number one, can you get to these pools and test the water? And when I say test the water, that means opening up the cover or just peeling it back in a corner and not just grabbing a sample of cold water and testing it. That's not going to work because the water is most likely too cold to be tested accurately. We've actually recently thought about doing an entire episode on why you need to warm up the water sample, but it's very simple. You need to warm up the water sample because reagents and test kits cannot read cold water accurately. So if you're going to take a water bottle and grab a sample of water, you need to close that water bottle and warm it up for a while. Maybe put it in your jacket, put it in your pocket, the dashboard of your truck in the sun, heat it up. When that water sample is warm enough to test, then you're going to get a more accurate reading. But it's not just water temperature that you need to be thinking about. If you have had a pool sitting there dormant for months, you need to get the water moving. So do you have a submersible pump? Drop a submersible pump into the deep end with a vacuum hose 6-7 feet long, whatever it is, so it kind of flails around. Stir that pool up. Get the water moving for a few minutes before you grab a sample. Okay, so maybe you want to peel back from the deep end, not the stairs. Drop that submersible pump to the bottom. Get it to move for a while. And you can do other things while you're waiting for that circulation to occur. So, for instance, one of the most obvious ideas is if there's a bunch of stuff on top of the cover, like pine needles, pine cones, leaves, dead organics. By the way, we talked about this in episode 53, a few episodes ago, about organic staining and tannins. Bring a leaf blower. It's a great idea. Bring a leaf blower. Get that stuff off the pool cover, off the pool deck, away from the pool. It's going to be a good service for the homeowner, and it's really going to help you out. So get that stuff off the cover. That alone right there is a really good idea, regardless of if you're testing the water. Because if you're trying to open up a clean pool and you've got, say, a mesh cover that has a whole bunch of decaying organics on it, those organics or those tannins are going to get into the water and you're going to open up to discolored or even stained pools. Okay, discolored water or stained pools, that's what I meant to say. So get the organics out of the way. All right, so after you use the leaf blower, now you grab your sample of water and you warm it up and you do your other stuff. Go back to your truck, test it, whatever you need to do. And I understand it's cold, so you probably want to test it in your truck. That's totally fine. Test it. Or if you're the homeowner listening to this, by the way, you can use a leaf blower as well. It's not exclusive to pool pros. And you can test it in the house. You just want to make sure that the water sample is warm enough. Test the water and figure out if your LSI balanced or not. Well, how are you going to know? You need a thermometer. You've warmed up the sample of water to test the other chemistry, but you need a thermometer in that cold pool to know what the temperature of the pool is. That happens after circulation. So you need it to be circulating. Drop that thermometer. I use one on a string. It's tied to my test kit. I'll just plink that thing into the water and just give it a few minutes to read, and it'll be pretty accurate. And if you're within 5 degrees or so, that's great. So if it's not frozen, it's probably in the 30s or 40s, but there's a big difference if you're 15 degrees off on the LSI. So you plug all that into the Orenda app, you find out where you're at. Most pools that have mesh covers or no covers are going to have a pretty high pH, and they're going to have a lower calcium than they winterized with because of rain and snow dilution. I know especially in the Northeast this year, there were some big snowstorms, a lot of sleet, a lot of precipitation, and there is no calcium in rain and snow. So it just drops the calcium levels down. That's to be expected. Do you need to raise those levels? I mean, you can definitely do it in cold water. Calcium dissolves really well in cold water. If your calcium's too low for the temperature that you're at, or where you think the temperature is going to be in a month, get that calcium up. The rule of thumb that we say at Orenda, because we understand the LSI, if your pool freezes in the winter, you're probably going to want at least 400 calcium in that water, even in the summer. It's going to make it much more affordable and more reliable to build your LSI strategy around that. Get your calcium up. And I'm not saying you have to get it way up. You don't have to be way over 400, but 400 is not going to scale your pool when the water warms up in April and May, because you can adapt to other things. When you open up, you'll be able to reduce the pH, you'll get your alkalinity in line. And in some cases, now that I've mentioned alkalinity, maybe you have plenty of calcium. Maybe you winterized it our way and you winterized with 550 or 600 calcium and you've got 400 already. That was the goal. You don't have to add any calcium. Maybe you just need to adjust your alkalinity. Or maybe you don't have to do anything. Maybe your high pH is keeping everything just fine, thanks to Henry's Law. So I guess what I'm getting at is get your LSI balanced, but you need to know the temperature in order to do that, and you need to warm up the sample, and both of those things require circulation. So peel back the cover, get a submersible pump in there, and test it accurately. So that's the first thing. What can you do now? You can do that. You can do that initial visit to get a full diagnostic of where you are. Document that, put it in a spreadsheet if you're a pool pro, put it in your service software, whatever you're using, document it. Now you have a layout of where your pools stand as of today's date. That's an awesome advantage, because then you get to see the difference when you come back to open it and you test it again, when you actually remove the cover and all that stuff, and you're going to see what changed. Write it down. This is a learning experience. The next year, it's probably going to do something very similar. So you can start preparing your future years based on what you learned this year. The big issue that I see with pool companies is they don't document this sort of stuff. At least they don't think about it. If you document it and you compare where that pool was in February or early March to where it is opening week, the first week of May or last week of April, whenever it is, that difference is very, very important. But let's take a step back from the Northeast and the Midwest and the cold areas for a moment. What about areas like Phoenix and Southern California and South Florida, where it's still open? They never actually closed. Getting into this season, you still have the opportunity that the people in the Northeast have to reset your water chemistry. Okay, so that's the second part of this. Those pools that closed, they need to do a reset, but they basically need to diagnose where they are right now to prepare for opening. You don't have to do that if you don't have a winter season. But a reset at the beginning of the season is a very good practice. Here's what I mean by reset. What can you take out of the equation? We've talked before about the word decide. The root of the word decide comes from Latin. De means to come from, to originate from, or to come off of, okay? And side means to kill or to cut down. Think of like pesticide, genocide, suicide, homicide. That's where that word comes from. So side means to kill off. So decide means you kill off the other options and commit to one. It doesn't mean, I'm going to make a decision and I've got these 6 options and I'm just going to pick one, but I'm going to keep my options open if that one doesn't work out. That is not a decision. Okay? That's wishy-washy at best. A true decision, when you decide, you kill off the other options, you disqualify them, you take them out of the equation, and you commit to the only one left. That is a decision. When I look at pool care, I look at it the same way. I decide to have minimalist pool care. I decide to give water the balance that it craves on the LSI. I remove factors from the equation so that I don't have to deal with them. Orenda does this specifically with removing phosphates and removing non-living organics. And to some degree, we chelate metals and minerals so that you don't have issues with scale and staining as well. But those things are still going to be in your pool. Whereas non-living organics and phosphates, you are literally removing them from the water. Get them out of the way. Those things affect chlorine efficiency. We've talked about that in the 4 pillars. I'm not going to go into it in this episode. If you do have questions about your pool or what we mean by this, just get on our website or on the app in the articles section or blog on the website and just type in pillar. And you're going to see our 4 pillars. And if you go through those or you take Orenda Academy 4 pillars, we're going to go in depth on what we mean by these things. These are the things that you should decide if you want to deal with or not. The fourth pillar is minimal cyanuric acid. We decide that we don't want too much CYA. We do not want overstabilization. That's a very important decision to make. And in the last episode, Jared and I were talking about standardizing pool chemistry. Well, there's a reason we're talking about that. Start with cyanuric acid. Get a baseline across all of your pools. Decide that you're going to learn from everybody's mistakes and everybody's successes so that your company has a standard of care. Decide that you're not going to have overstabilization and you're not going to have too many phosphates and you're not going to have too many non-living organics so that chlorine can be used as effectively and efficiently as possible, because you're not going to have a lot of it. There's no way to sugarcoat it. The chlorine shortage is real. It is going to continue, and hopefully not for too long. Hopefully sometime this season manufacturing picks back up. But again, the main shortage is not that we don't have chlorine manufacturers. It's that elemental chlorine is in short supply thanks to other industries that are pinching, like PVC. So keep that in mind. Now, the other thing, getting back to the decide, what can we do right now? Well, we can start getting these things out of our water. It's a little too cold. Let's go back to the Northeast and the Midwest where the pools are closed. It's a little too cold right now to start addressing metals. No sequestering or chelating agent like SC1000 is going to work in really cold water. And we're not exactly sure of what degree it stops working and it just goes dormant and waits, but we think it's about 60 to 65 degrees. So it doesn't make sense to put that in right now because it's just going to sit dormant until it gets warm enough to do something. But you can put enzymes in, and they are going to be very slow right now, but they are going to work, and as the water warms up, they'll work even faster. You can chlorinate, but chlorine is going to work very slow. You can remove phosphates. It'll be slow, but it'll also work. So you can do these things now to get ahead of when you actually peel that cover back and start your season. For those of you who do not close your pools and have covers to deal with, you might just want to wait a little bit so that the water is warmer because you don't have that opening process to deal with. But getting your season off to a good start is a great way to have a sort of an herbal cleanse before you start your season. A hard reset, so to speak. Get the pipes cleaned out. Get the filter cleaned out. Do all these things so that you are putting yourself and your customer in the most advantageous position for the season. They want to have the most clean, efficient pool that they can, using as little chlorine as possible so that you can make that chlorine go as long. In short, what can you do today to make opening day easier? I've always said it's best to ease into the winter and to ease out of the winter. You don't want to do an abrupt change on opening day if you can help it. For those pools that do not have a winter and they're just nonstop, you can still reset your chemistry at the beginning of the season and it should go better for you. Try to be as efficient as possible. Use the LSI to your advantage. Contain pH and build a strategy around that so that you use a lot less acid and bicarb throughout the season. Hopefully, that is going to allow you to have a more successful season amidst all the stresses of the supply chain shortages. I guess that's pretty much it. Thanks for your time, everyone. I'm Eric Knight with Orenda. Until next time, this has been Rule Your Pool. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Rule Your Pool, a podcast by Orenda Technologies. For more information on what we discussed in this week's episode, check the links in the description or visit www.orendatech.com.
I hope you find this show valuable enough that you tap that subscribe button and share it with your friends. You can also like us on Facebook and social media. And with our help, you'll be able to rule your pool without over-treating it with chemicals and wasting money. I'll see you next episode.